Hey everybody, how is everyone doing? I see all you guys in the chat. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you guys so much for stopping by my channel, The Magical Solution, here on Facebook and on YouTube Live. I am super excited once again tonight to speak to one of the people that I admire so much. I have been #stalking him for forever, for the longest time on YouTube, reading all of his stuff, following him on Facebook. And when he came out with his new book, 21 Divisions, I said to myself, okay, it's time, Lailani. I got to get over my fangirlness and talk to this person. So if you don't know who I'm talking about, his name is Hector Salva, Papa Hector Houngan, and he is absolutely amazing. When I got a chance to speak with him for a few minutes, I completely fangirled. I was like screeching and like getting all giggly, and I had to calm myself down. And so like I said, if you don't know who he is, get on this train. So he is a Brujo Espiritista of the 21 Divisions and Sanse Espiritismo. He is the author of 21 Divisions, Mysteries and Magic of Dominican Voodoo, and Dona Juana, Journey of a Brujo, Espiritista, and Healer. And since 1989, he's helped tens of thousands of people worldwide. He is the founder and leader of an international spiritual center with members and apprentices worldwide. So I'm done talking. Let's meet this guy because you are absolutely going to love him. Here we go. Let's talk to him. Hey.
Hi, Lailani. Hello, everyone.
How are you friggin' doing tonight? What's going on?
Oh, I'm awesome. It's a beautiful Sunday. I'm really excited to be here with you and with everyone here who's sitting with us and getting ready to talk about, brujeria.
Yes.
My favorite topic.
Yes. So we have a bunch of people coming into the chat now. People are so excited. And I want to get right to it. How about you? You want to get to it?
Yeah.
So I guess let's start with the history. Let's start with the history and the geography. Let's get all the boring stuff out of the way, right? And then we'll talk about the judgy stuff. So 21 Divisions, right? That's what your book is about.
Exactly.
Where did this start? What's the history around this? Like, how did 21 Divisions come to be?
So in the Caribbean, right, we had the native Arawak Indians and the native Taino Indians. And eventually, when Christopher Columbus came over, the first place he landed is what we now call Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic. And he brought in the European influence, and eventually the slaves were also brought over, unfortunately, due to slavery. And on the island known as Hispaniola, which includes Haiti as well as the Dominican Republic, the practices of the slaves, their original religions, as well as the native Taino and Arawak practices, along with Catholicism and a bunch of other influences, came together in order to preserve the religious traditions of the native people and the African people who came together to serve the spirits. And eventually this was handed down throughout the centuries to people and was basically passed along the line like any other religious tradition. However, we had to remain undercover due to the influence of Catholicism, which, doesn't really, it gets jealous of other people being around, some religions, they're like a little bit like a jealous Judy. And so they couldn't handle that. So we've hidden under the cover for a very long time and have practiced these magical, shamanic, mystical, witchcraft-based traditions, which are really healing towards all types of people and life situations.
So speaking of that, you brought up the mystical, magical aspects, but you keep calling it a religion. So I'm curious, is Dominican Voodoo, is 21 Divisions, is that like a religious system? Is that a mystical system? Is that a magical system, a folk system? Like, what kind of practice actually is it?
It's actually like a mystical, spiritual system, which of course includes magic, right? Religion is basically dogma and government. Spirituality is basically about you coming in contact with God yourself, right? And mysticism is about that journey that we all take towards the truth and towards ourselves and God, the divine. So our tradition is really about you getting in contact with that divine part of yourself, as well as the divine that exists all around you. And that's what heals humanity.
So true. So true. When you say the word, so we have, it's a two-parter type of title, 21 Divisions, Dominican Voodoo, right? I just want to focus on the second part, the voodoo part. So when you go online to research voodoo, you're going to see voodoo spelled like 5 different ways, right? You got the double O, you got the OU, you got the UU, you got the, you know what I mean? So like, what are the differences among these voodoos? Because I do know that, at least in the Caribbean, you have that Haitian voodoo, you have that Dominican voodoo, and then you even have Puerto Rican voodoo. Are you able to explain the differences for us?
Mm-hmm. So originally, the term that the slaves used was Vodou, which is Vodou. However, the European people decided to term it voodoo. So voodoo is actually a colonial term, a European term to refer to our traditions. Now, we're smart, right? So we don't get rid of anything. We adopt it, you know? And so we've adopted the term voodoo too and took it on for ourselves by empowering ourselves with the word instead of allowing it to be used like a slur. It was originally intentionally to slur our religion, our spiritual systems, right? But we took it and we're like, yeah, but that's fine with us too. And so each place, however, their voodoo developed differently. And so in Puerto Rico, that developed amongst certain influences that existed in Puerto Rico. And in DR, same. And these influences kind of similar in a sense because they both had a very heavy Spaniard, European foundation in which those traditions grew up or were raised in the Caribbean. Whereas in Haiti, it was raised under like a French influence, right? And the French and the Spaniards were very different in terms of being religious. So the French were just religious enough to get the Catholic Church to financially support them. The Spanish were like religious to like a fault, right? So they were extremely religious and extremely involved with the Catholic Church, which meant they really worked their influence in Spanish countries way more. And we had way more Catholic churches. So in order for our traditions to survive, we had to incorporate those to a higher degree. Whereas in Haiti, they also got rid of the French and their control all the way back in 1804. So they were able to practice Vodou in a way that was more similar to the African way of practice, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, it does. I have to ask because it's going to be brought up. It is. It's going to be brought up, and by all means, it's not coming from a place of malice. It's just coming from a place of ignorance. People just don't know, right? And when most people who don't know hear the word voodoo, the very first thing they think about is animal sacrifice, right? Drumming around a fire, slaughtering animals, right? And I know that, again, it's not a malicious thought. It's just that's the media. That's what they've been fed. That's what they've been told. Now, is that true among the voodoos, and specifically 21 Divisions? Is there animal sacrifice in your practice?
So it is true that there are voodoo practices that have animal sacrifice. So it's also true that the Jews sacrifice animals, that the Muslims sacrifice animals, that the Hindus sacrifice animals, but no one seems to have an issue with that.
Say it.
The reason they don't have an issue with that is when you know something has no real power, you're not scared. So call me Mr. Shady, but that's what it is. So that's one. Two is in Dominican Voodoo or Dominican Voodoo 21 divisions, there are certain lineages. Our practices are regional. So it shifts and changes depending on where your lineage or where your practice comes from. So there's a small percentage of lineages that practice animal sacrifices, and there's also a large percent of lineages that do not practice any animal sacrifice whatsoever. So we have like lineages, for example, from Punta Cana, which is the eastern side of the island, where to those lineages, animal sacrifice is equated with black magic. So no animal sacrifice is conducted there. Where we have other lineages that are like from Mao or the border with Haiti, where more Haitian influences are present. And in Haitian Vodou, there is more animal sacrifice present. So therefore, you'll find animal sacrifice there. So we have a mix of practitioners that practice animal sacrifices and some that don't. And also some that only practice animal sacrifice in very small certain situations where it's absolutely required in their lineages.
So speaking of lineages, so before when we were just kind of defining what 21 divisions is, whether it's a folk tradition or mystical or, you know, magical, when we were kind of putting that into perspective, when you bring up the term lineages and regional, does that also affect the mystical magical aspects of it, or is it pretty much the same across the board? Like are the tenets the same across the board, or does that vary based on the region and lineage?
So the foundational tenets are the same across the board, which is what allows us to be a tradition. Because if everybody was doing their own thing, we'd call it everybody doing their own thing, right?
It's true though. It's true. And you see so many people who are outsiders who want to separate the magic from the culture, or the mysticism from the religion, or whatever, or the cult, you know, the spirits from the people. And you can't separate it. They are so interlinked and so intertwined. That's insane.
Yeah, this is not a separatist type of thing. And so in some lineages, you might have more emphasis like on the mystical side, and some lineages more emphasis on the magical side. But basically what may change is the emphasis. Right. Not so much that it exists or doesn't exist. It exists everywhere in the tradition. It's just different lineages might emphasize one part of the practice versus another part.
So speaking of that, are there categories of 21 divisions? Because when we, like, if you were to Google 21 divisions right now, right, you'll come up with that infamous iconic picture. Actually, let me see if I can find it for you guys so that everyone else can see it. This iconic picture of like the dude in the center and then all of these saints and all of these things around this guy in the center. But then if you look closely, it'll say Division Negra, Division Blanca, Division India. Like, what does that, am I allowed to ask what that means?
So the 21 divisions, the divisions themselves are the groups of spirits that are served. So 21 divisions means that there's actually more than 21. The number is symbolic. Right? Okay. It's symbolic of all the nations that came together to produce the tradition, meaning all the tribes and spiritual practices that were included. However, there's more than 21 actual divisions, and each division is a group of spirits that we deal with or that we work with.
Interesting. That's kind of like I know in Espiritismo, that's very much how we kind of do it too. You know, we kind of group them. It's you know, if you're an outsider looking in, it's slightly racist. You're like, okay, the Indians go over here, the Romanis go over here, the Congo spirits go over here, and you kind of like segregate them a little bit. But it's more of just kind of keeping everything in its place and those energies and where they stem from. So that's really similar. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. The I'm curious to know though, where do the saints fit in all of this? Because, you know, when we talk about these divisions and their regional lineages and where they come from and how they came from the slaves, they come from the Indians, they come from the Tainos, they come from here and there, the Spaniards. Where do the saints come from in this mixture, and how did they get there? Because a lot of times you see them almost replacing a lot of the Congo spirits and a lot of the more melanated kind of spirits.
Well, that's where the Catholic influence came in, right? So what happened was, because we were under Catholic rule, we couldn't really practice serving the spirits, especially the melanated spirits, right? And so what happened was the Catholics worked to try to wipe us away and get rid of us. However, we're kind of like roaches. We're hard to get rid of. Okay? It takes a lot more than that. Okay? So what happened was that basically we could no longer use our images of our own spirits. So what we did was, as we always do, is we adjusted and we're like, oh, so we have to deal with this? That's fine. We're going to use this to be a representative of this spirit. So each saint then became the statue or the symbol for another spirit which we were still dealing with. And so that's where we took up the saints, right? And racism in our countries, it does exist. Racism exists everywhere. That's period, point blank, right? Yeah. However, the racism that you see here in the US and the racism in other parts of the world is somewhat different.
Yeah.
Right? And part of it is because in like a small island nation, we do have to mix ourselves together. Mm-hmm. Okay, no one can afford to be like, oh, I'm not going over there because, no, we have to all get along, right? And so many of us were made up of many different races and cultures all in one, right? That's what makes us so delicious, is that you get all the flavors.
That is right? So true. Being of Puerto Rican descent, you go to Puerto Rico, you'll see everything from blonde hair, ivory skin, and blue eyes, all the way to what we call the trigueñita, the negra, the real dark, beautiful Afro, beautiful Puerto Rican, and everything in between. You know what I mean? And I love that about us. I love that. You can literally find every nation in the Caribbean. It's beautiful. Which brings me to my next subject, because when we talk about, for example, Brujo, you talk about this in your book. You talk about this term Brujo. And I remember growing up in my Puerto Rican Catholic household, and the word Brujo was not a good word. Like you that was not something that you identified as, right? Because it was black magic. It was the person that cursed and hexed, right? And then like it transitioned into being sort of like a joke. If you had some kind of mystical interest, they'd be like, ha ha ha, la bruja, ha ha ha, the brujo, and they would joke around. And then eventually you get that third step where now we're in the era of people sort of reclaiming that word and now self-identify as a brujo or a bruja. And I'm just wondering what your experience with that is, because in your book you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I grew up in the tradition. So I actually watched this whole transition happen, right? Because so like in Puerto Rico specifically, there was like a whole campaign against brujos by the Protestant church hooked up with the government of Puerto Rico and the government of the US to make us look like charlatans, to make us look like thieves and evil and dumb, etc., etc. They actually passed out pamphlets right? Which I actually saw one a long time back about, it was like a little story, a little like kid story, because back in them days, like poor people weren't as educated. So it was like a little kid's story picture book making fun of brujeria that was produced by the US government and the Protestant church, passed around in order to stop people from going to brujos. Then eventually, like you said, it started to become more like a joke. Oh, you're a brujo, ha ha, so funny. Oh, read my palm. Oh, what you see, what you see. Okay. And, you know, we would see that you were an idiot, but we were nice. So, so then eventually, what happened was the US government found out that some of these things that brujos were giving were actually curing things, such as curing rectal cancer, right? And so they were like, oh, there must be something behind this. And so it became, the whole campaign changed. It changed into becoming like the term for national identity, reclaiming our roots, showing who we are and our culture, and so on and so forth. And so now it's being reclaimed all over the world, and brujos are no longer as, basically, we're not under the thumb so much. So now we can be like, yeah, I'm a brujo, right?
It almost became like the other term for witch, just like the Spanish word for witch, and that's it, but like in a good way.
Exactly. And so the word brujo transforms, and even though it has transformed big here in the US, even though that, there's still some old people in the islands that to them they're still indoctrinated from that old manual saying that we're crazy or charlatans or we have psychological disorders. There were all types of things that were propagated against us. And so basically, yeah, now we're taking the turn back and we're taking our power back. And it is, however, one thing I would like to know is our brujo is a little bit different than your American witch. Okay? Because your American witch, basically, I'm just going to call it a spade.
Say it.
Anybody who picks up a damn book and reads a few spells can call themselves a witch here in America.
Right. Yeah.
In our culture, you can't just call yourself a witch. The community has to actually identify you as a witch and say, hey, that person's work works. They actually help people. And it's not just a solo practice, right? It's about helping other people. And it's actually a whole community that has to come together and acknowledge you and give you kind of almost like the rights to really call yourself that. Versus here, you know, everyone's a self-appointed brujo, right? So,
or a self-appointed high priest and priestess. Ooh,
oh yeah, all the time we see like beginners, and tomorrow they're preaching to you about how brujeria works.
Yes.
Okay.
You were saying it the other day. Yo, you're 23 years old, but you got 30 years of experience as a witch? Okay.
Yeah, because they were practicing, you know, before even the sperm and the egg came together. They were already practicing.
In a
right?
past life, they brought the knowledge with them.
Yep. And at 2 years old, they were over there like, you know, curing people. Now, with that being said, however, in our tradition in the DR, brujos usually start out really young.
Yeah.
Because usually you're discovered as a brujo somewhere between the age of like 3 and 10.
Yes.
And when they find out you're a brujo, they're like, oh, you're a brujo, we need to go take you somewhere so that they can start taking care of you. Because if not, there can be other issues that happen. And we know that in our culture. So I've seen little children who are like 9 years old doing spiritual work and giving out lottery numbers, etc. But that doesn't happen here in America, boo-boo. No, it doesn't. And here in America, when, you know, Jenny says like, oh yeah, her great grandmother taught her some things, that's very questionable because, you know, your base religion here was Protestantism,
Right.
So if the Catholics were bad and really tried to get rid of us, trust. The
Yeah.
Protestants barely allowed it, you know? And so it's really hard for people to claim that. They can
Yeah.
claim whatever the hell they want. But
I mean, do you think that's another reason why so many of us, like for example, you writing your books, me myself doing the community service and stuff like that, do you feel like that's cuz I know for me that's part of what I feel my mission is, because I feel there are a lot of young people coming into this world kind of just knowing, kind of having that sight, having that gift, but literally not having the upbringing and not having the culture like we had, where they can get sent to someone to hone their gifts and to really give them some structure. And so like people like you come in, you write your books to help guide them. People like myself, we go out, we mission. Like it's a lot of work to try and capture these kids that are actually out there, but just don't have the luxury of the culture that can support them and take them in like that. You know what I mean? Like
100%.
America definitely lacks that. I feel you're right. I feel like America lacks the mystical, magical culture and being able to identify the gifted ones and then call them in and say, okay, honey, this is what you need to do. And this is how you do it. And these kids are all by themselves. They got the Google, they got the books, they want to run before they walk. But that's not to say that they're not gifted. It's just where to start. Where do you start?
Yeah,
You know?
100%. And even for a lot of people who are Puerto Rican or Dominican, that doesn't mean that you grew up in these practices, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of families, this was not discussed.
Right.
Even if your grandmother was a bruja, you weren't allowed to hang out when she was doing brujeria. They kept you away from that, right?
Right.
So even people who are Dominican or who are Puerto Rican or are Haitian doesn't mean that they grew up in the tradition. There's very
Exactly.
few that can actually be like, yeah, I actually grew up in the tradition, especially if you grew up in the USA, right?
Right.
Because even more so in the USA, they were like, no, we're not going to do that savage stuff here. So
And especially in traditions like this, which I want to ask you about with regards to the initiation process and all that stuff. But I was having this conversation with a friend of mine not too long ago where people are starting to feel, young people are starting to feel entitled to these initiatory closed off practices simply because they are Haitian or they are, Puerto Rican or they are Dominican. They automatically feel, oh, well, I can just do this stuff without being initiated because I'm Dominican or I'm Haitian or I'm this. And we were having this discussion because we felt like there's no such thing as a birthright open access to closed traditions. Even if you are born Dominican, Haitian, whatever, you still have to go through the proper channels and learn those things. Am I wrong there? Am I overstepping my bounds by saying that, or do you agree with that?
no, that's 100%. So just because you're Dominican, just because you're Bill Gates' son doesn't mean you're smart. Okay? Just because, just because just because you're the son of a billionaire doesn't mean that you have that wisdom, doesn't mean that you have that knowledge. Just because you're the child of a doctor does not make you a doctor. And that's what people have to understand, that in this, we are doctors to the soul. And so you can't take people's like spirit lightly. A lot of people get messed up from going to people who, they're not willing to invest in the spirits. They say they're about spiritual progress, but when you're about something, you do what it takes, right? And they just want to ride on the tails of like, well, my great grandmother practiced it. Yeah, but your mother didn't, and you weren't raised in it, and you don't really know anything about it. And being Puerto Rican or Dominican, it doesn't give you any like points. Okay,
Right.
you don't get like race points,
Right.
but you still have to go through the proper channels. Okay.
Right.
And here's the thing, this whole racism is caca, okay? Because a lot of spiritualists believe in reincarnation, okay? Claim to believe in reincarnation. And then turn around and like, oh, well, you can't belong to our traditions because you're Chinese or because you're white or because you're this or because you're that. The spirits choose their people. People don't choose who get to serve the spirits. Okay? And I met lots of people that they're from all types of backgrounds. Okay, here in America, just because you were born and raised in America doesn't mean that you're not a brujo. Doesn't mean that you don't have those gifts. Just because you're yellow, orange, purple doesn't mean that you're not a human spirit and you don't have gifts. Okay,
Right.
there's one God that gives to all. There's not the Chinese God, the God for the Arabs, the God just for the Africans, heaven for the, and then heaven, there's a heaven for the Africans, and a heaven for the Arabs, and a heaven for this one, and a heaven for that one, right? So a lot of, so uh, untrained spiritualists constantly speak in contradiction of what they claim that is truth, right? Because I know a lot of Puerto Rican people out here, or Dominican or Mexican, and if you look at them from the outside, myself included, you're not going to figure out what we are.
Right.
Okay?
I get, for me, I get that all the time. Yep.
Yeah, that's that beautiful rainbow that exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to know that we are Hispanic or Latino or this or this or that, right? But then you're going to assume that from appearances, who can do what and what spirits call who and blah, blah, blah. In our traditions, all the voodoo traditions, we are servants to God and the spirits first. We're not their masters, right? So
Ooh.
we don't get to choose who is chosen. They choose who's
They
chosen.
do. So in Dominican voodoo, in 21 divisions, it's a monotheistic religion with
Yeah.
with many I would say sub like demigods or like spirits beneath that sort of
Exactly.
govern. Okay. And in this practice, is 21 divisions a solitary practice that you could potentially do by yourself, or does it have to be communal, or is it both?
It's both. So it's both in the sense that on a solitary level, every person is a servant. Everyone has to do their solitary work because if you don't, you can't survive off of group work, right? Group work happens or community work happens every once in a while, but every day you're alive. Okay,
Right.
so every day you have to wash your ass, and every day you should be taking care of your spirit, right?
Right.
So there's the solitary portion of the practice, but we're also a communal practice and we're about the community. And so there's that portion of the practice. For some practitioners, it's going to be mainly solitary, right? Especially practitioners that are being called more so for their own life, their own health, and their own success, right? And then other practitioners that are called to assist others are also going to have that communal aspect to their work. So it's both, right? We kind of include it all. So we don't like to choose.
Right.
Yeah.
You did a beautiful YouTube video a while back talking about the types of service, and you did a wonderful job explaining the solitary aspect of it, which is exactly what you said just now, and then the communal part, because it's in service to the spirits. So the communal part is the celebration. If I'm saying this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I just want to paraphrase. The communal part is that celebration and that offering to the spirit, that offering up to the spirit. And then the solitary part is that elevation of self to meet the spirit. Does that make sense? Did I say that right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean your YouTube channel and your book, just everything that you put out there is just absolute pure gold. I think you're probably one of the realest people I've ever spoken to on these subjects as a whole, and I absolutely love it. There was a question back in regarding the saints, and I kind of want to tie that into my next question. But she asked, when we were talking about how the saints came in and they came in through Catholicism, one of the things that she had asked, and I want to say it was, oh man, it was way back here. She basically just wanted to know, don't the saints, here we go, Lucienne said, but don't the saints have their own power? And they're not just a substitute or a veil for the African or the melanated spirits. Can you comment on that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the saints have their own power, and we can call upon the saints, or we can use that image and call upon the deity or the spirit, however you want to term it, that's behind that saint. So we can call upon the saint, or we can call upon the misterio, the mystery. But the saint is a dead person, right? So their power is not at the same level as the power of like a mystery. So we can call upon the saints, and like in Espiritismo, which I know we're talking about 21 divisions, but in Espiritismo, we have the commission or the group of santos. And that's where we're actually calling the saints just like the saints. We're calling upon like Saint Anne as Saint Anne, like the grandmother of Jesus, right? However, that saint, the saints, remember, we're Catholic. So they also hold their Catholic moralities and their Catholic ways, right? Just because they died doesn't mean that they all of a sudden accept everyone, okay?
Gotcha.
So they all have their own ways and their own essence as a human spirit that they were. And so they may not be willing to assist you in certain things that Anaisa would, which is the same that which is the mystery that we associate with Saint Anne. Right?
Interesting. So these misterios, why do we call them misterios? Like, are they, because the way you described them, it did sound a little bit like they are more primordial spirits, but aren't some of them also ancestral spirits too? Or or is that a whole different category?
No, you're correct. Misterios, we have both the primordial misterios as well as misterios which were ancestral spirits or actually living people. But throughout the course of their working on assisting humanity and humanity serving them back, they've been elevated to the status of mystery. And so over time, they've gotten elevated to that status. With that status, they're able to affect and help a greater deal of other people.
Cool. So when you're coming into this practice, when you're being initiated into this practice, are you given all of the misterios, or are you given one like guide misterio that stays with you? Are you given like a small little group that you start off with to work with? Like, am I allowed to, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask that question, but basically, what does that initiatory process look like if you can share?
Okay, so when you're initiated, you're not given anything.
Okay.
We can't give you the mysteries of God. Only God gives you the mysteries, right? What we do is we identify those mysteries that are born with you, those mysteries that are with you. And over the course of life, just like you meet and make deep connections with other people and they become part of your family, it's the same thing. Throughout the course of life, there's other misterios that can become part of your spirit family, in essence, and be with you. But we don't give you the misterios. Rather, we identify and reveal. We have to peel back the onion. Every person is an onion. So we peel back those layers to find out who you really are and what misterios were given to you at birth and what misterios is with you. And we peel that back throughout the course of layers, and then that's where we go from there. Some people have one misterio, other people have 100 misterios. But here's another trick in what I'm saying there is a person who has one misterio can be more powerful than a person with 100. So 100 misterios doesn't make you powerful.
Okay.
Okay. In fact, I know people that have really beautiful altars and they have like 500 images in there, and you know they're weak sauce completely. Okay.
Yeah. I call it glamour magic, like glam magic, where it's just like it's all aesthetics, it's all just pretty, but it ain't shit. You ain't shit.
Exactly. And in reality, in our tradition, most people who actually are brujos, like who actually serve the community and work for people, we usually only deal with like a handful, like 3 to 6, 7 misterios at maximum, because each misterio is a job, it is a responsibility, and it is a lot of work. And you can't cultivate 100 best friends.
Right.
Okay.
Seriously.
If you have 100 best friends, you're a false motherfucker. Mm-hmm. Okay, because you can't have 100 people that is your best friend. So you can't cultivate 100 tight relationships, right? My own godmother, my madrina, Nereida, she herself had many misterios, but chose to only cultivate one misterio, which was Papa Chango. And with Papa Chango, she did everything. And she helped way more people than I've helped yet in my lifetime, right? Wow. And she was able to do that all the time, and people would come to her and be like, oh, you know, you have more misterios. When are you going to start serving these misterios? And my godmother would say, well, tell them to leave an application, but we're not hiring currently.
Okay? I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Pretty much. And why get 10 tools for what one can accomplish? It's called clutter, right? Mm-hmm. But we live in a very much consumerist society, and a society where it's like more, right? Mm-hmm. My uncle, who was my padrino, right? He basically served 3 misterios. And when you would enter his altar room, there was one picture of a Catholic saint and 2 chairs. That's all that was in there. And a few bottles of liquor, you know, and a few cloths that we use to tie the spirits. So a few of our various cloths and a horse saddle. And that was it. And that's all you found in there. And he had on the regular, you know, 40, 50 people waiting in the yard to consult him 3 times a week. Right? Wow. My godmother, who I was her assistant for many years, right, used to consult anywhere between 100 plus people on a weekly basis with one misterio.
Wow.
You know?
Speaking of the scarves, because it's true, when you go to Google 21 Divisions, you see that beautiful altar with like the rainbow colored scarves draped across the altar, and it's gorgeous. Am I allowed to ask what those scarves are? Well, what is that?
Those scarves are sacred cloth, which we often refer to as pañuelos in Spanish, or fulas in what we call spirit language. And with those cloth, we tie the various spirits so that they can be identified. And those cloths are also used in various ceremonies and workings and healings on people. But in reality, all a brujo needs is himself. And if he needs a little extra, when I travel all around the world doing this work. And what I usually bring with myself is like 2 or 3 of those scarves of my main misterios, and maybe a deck of cards if I plan to do a whole bunch of quick readings. And then I move on with my life. I'm ready. I'm prepared. I have all my tools, right? So tools are an extension of the brujo. The brujo don't need the tools. The tools, they need the brujo.
Right. Speaking of Brujo, just to kind of come back, when we were talking about initiation, I kind of wanted to get a better understanding of a little bit of like the hierarchy within the system itself. So Brujo is just like one piece of it that could potentially be a part of the 21 divisions. What are some of the other titles? Like, what are some of the other roles that's in the community?
So we have brujos, we have aplazas. So the aplaza is usually the assistant to the brujo, right? The main person that assists, because when a person undergoes possession or has a misterio, they're not going to remember things. They're not going to be able to really be able to help at that point. And the misterio is going to need someone to pass them things and help them out do things, right? We have the aplaza, Then we have the servidor, right? And usually a servidor is someone who they deal with the spirits mainly for themselves. So for their life, their improvement, and for themselves. And because we all do it, everyone is considered a servidor, even the brujo, even the aplaza. So everyone is a servidor, which means a servant, right? And so we have the servidor de misterios. And then finally, we have the devotos. We have devotos, which are the devotees. These people usually just don't have any real spiritual connection. They don't really have a big spiritual gift. However, they do have basically the love and the faith and that connection with God. And they may not have the gifts to see the spirits or communicate and deal with the spirits themselves directly, but they know it exists and they know and they have a spiritual connection. They just don't have those other gifts in order to communicate. In which case, those individuals usually have a brujo that they work with, that they go to, that's their brujo, right? That's their godparent. And so those are the types that we have in our tradition. But at the very foundation is that everyone is a servidor. So the way that I was taught was that basically no one is better than anyone else. Okay? You can't have the brujo without the devoto. Right? A lot of people have this thing, especially here in America, like titles. It makes you some type of special, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is what I was taught by my madrina. My madrina said, the reason you're a brujo is because you're more fucked up. Okay? You need more help than the rest. In order for you to have a successful life, which Joe Blow can do without any spiritual connection whatsoever, you need to put in the work and you need to serve others in order for you to be blessed. Right? So my madrina used to always tell people, like, basically, don't think you're special because you're a brujo, because you're there to be a servant of the people.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever come across, so even though everyone is supposed to feel like no one is better than the other, have you ever come across people in the community, and not necessarily speaking about your specific community, but who have faked it, like faked certain like getting mounted, for example, like have they faked that process, and can you tell when someone is faking or trying to be more than what their gifts give?
Mm-hmm. We have seen it. We've seen it plenty of time. It happens, right? Because people have egos, right? So they want to be special. Being a horse of the spirit, being mounted, doesn't make you special. So that's another thing, right? So we have seen it faked, and we can tell. And depending on the other brujos that are there, we can be assholes about it. Okay? So we will do fucked up things, okay? Such as give you things to drink that we know that you can't drink unless you're possessed. Okay? Such as, like, basically shove pins in your arm waiting for you to yell out in pain because the spirit wouldn't. Such as light up a fire for you and tell you, hey, shove your hands in there because we need a cleansing. Okay? And so we can be that way, or sometimes we can just be like, oh, okay, we see you, we see what you're doing, and we will alert the community. Okay, right. We will let people know, and the community, especially in the islands, the community will deal with you. Okay, here in America, however, because these communities aren't so tight and we're all spread far apart, it's kind of easier for people to get away with certain things, which is part of the reason that I wrote the book, because having something for people to go to and be like, hey, I'm not so certain. I feel like something might be a little wonky here. Maybe I have some type of reference to go to, right? So here in the US, it can happen more often and more easily. And it's harder for the community to monitor that. And we've seen it happen so many times. It's very unfortunate. Here in the US, we've seen it happen, unfortunately, in some very ugly ways,
Yeah.
right? And but it doesn't matter because sooner or later, the misterios deal with everyone. And we've seen what happens to people over time when they do these things.
Some of them
And
don't come out alive.
many of them don't come out alive. Many of them end up in vegetative states. Many of them end up with all kinds of illnesses. Many of them end up having children suffer the consequences, which they now have to care for those children.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
We've
crazy.
seen altars wrecked, like
Yeah.
where finally a person who was faking it, finally the misterio's like, okay, I'm going to come for real now. And they come through that same faker and they destroy the whole fucking altar. And they break everything in front of everyone.
Yep.
And totally embarrass that person. So we don't need the police because we have the spirits. And the spirits police themselves. And they're more than capable of doing that.
Love it. Listen, you guys, I can't believe we're already down to like the last like 8 minutes. I have like a million more questions, but before I ask a million more questions, I want to tell everyone who's watching right now, make sure you pick up this book, okay? It's called 21 Divisions, Dominican Voodoo. Like you guys will love this book, and I don't know, I just can't say much about it. I just like it's a great book. You being here talking about all of these subjects, I'm so grateful. I want to just say thank you so much for doing this. Let's I gotta go back to all these questions. There's so many. There's one that asked a little bit about like just to kind of talk a little bit about the mounting again, like for example, if the caballo, if the person being mounted, for example, only speaks English and the spirit speaks a different language, they won't be able to speak that language. Or if the spirit has like a specific kind of movement that they do when they come down and that person getting mounted doesn't know that movement, they can't just fake that. Like those are like some ways that you can tell when someone is being, dishonest. And they just wanted to just kind of verify that for you and say that they've experienced that. Someone asked about madamas. Do you work with madamas in 21 Divisions?
La Madama, we do have her. So there are madamas in the 21 Divisions, and they work there's various divisions that they actually exist within. So,
okay.
like, there's madamas that walk in different groups.
Okay. So that, I believe that was Marius's question. So hopefully that answered it. So I want to give a shout out to everyone really quick before I let you go. So we had Marina, we had Rob, we had Apple Slices United. That's an awesome name. Marius, Mambo Sandy was here. Ty, Miss Garcia was here. Steven is here. Lucianne asked a lot of great questions. Nancy Muniz, Mel, Natasha, Amy, Chichi, Elohim Lefar, he's another author. Patricia, Omira. Oh my goodness, so many people. Alicia, I just want to say Valerie, Liz, thank you guys so much. Anise, Jennifer, thank you guys so much for coming tonight, for joining us. We're going to go back and look at your questions and try and answer them as much as possible. Edley, I guess this is one of your guys. To everyone, if Papa accepts work for you, consider yourself blessed. He's true. He does not sugarcoat things and gets you results, and be willing to put in the work.
Yeah, I'm very picky because like I want people who want results.
Yes.
Right? I want to get you results. I want to see happy people. When I take someone on, that person is like a family member to me. So I want my people happy, and I want my people to succeed and really do well. And so we're really serious with our stuff here. And
what are some tips? What are some tips that you would give to someone who's interested in joining 21 Divisions? What are you looking for in like a godchild? Like what kind of tips could you give them?
Here's my number one tip. right, is be real. I'm looking for real. I don't care how messed up you are. Everyone's messed up. Okay. That's why you come to the hospital, right? Which is the spiritual center. I tell everyone here a spiritual center or a spiritual temple is a hospital. We're here to, everyone is sick. We're here to help people. So, but we can only help what's real. If you come here being all false and fake, first of all, I can see through it. Second of all, it's just disgusting. Third of all, you have the rest of the world to be false and fake with. Be real with me. Be real with your spiritual person. You know, if you're going through the shit, you're going through the shit. Sometimes you are, right?
Yeah.
Just be real with it. And
Yeah.
then we have something real to work with and real to heal. And now we can start to really get into some deep stuff, right? So be real. And that's number one. And be committed to whatever you're saying you want to do with your life, right? So if you want to be happy and successful, then you have to be willing to put in the work. Otherwise, it's just like want, like the Charlie Brown teacher, right? Like, no, be real, be straight up. We're almost always willing to work with people if they're real and they're straight up. You know, I have people that come here to me and they're like, Papa, hey, I can't afford this, right? And I'm like, okay, you're real. Now I got something to work with. Now let's work something out for you. Let's figure it out. Let's get you where you need to be. We will figure it out. We will work with you. But we can't work with fake. Okay?
Right.
You know, it just doesn't work. Right? And that's what we want. I want my people to be real and I want my people to be committed to having a good life. Right? If you're committed to dramas, then watch novelas. Okay? Don't come here. Right? Because you're going to get yourself in a whole world of problems coming here. I promise. Right? Because one thing that my auntie would tell everyone about me is don't let the sweetness fool you. People
Me
that
too.
sweet, okay? People that sweet will mess you up. Okay? And that's what my auntie would tell everyone. You know, people that there's no such thing as being that nice unless you know you can fuck somebody up like that, right? So be real with us. I don't care. I've heard everything under the sun. I've heard everything. Some of the worst things people think, things that people don't tell their Catholic priests. People have told me, and we don't judge. I don't care. I don't care what you're into. I care about you, the essence of who you are and making your life a happy life and getting you towards that happiness and that joy, not for like 10 lifetimes from now, but now. So we're trying to get that shit now. We're not waiting till tomorrow. Okay. So if you give us something real to work with and you're straight up, I don't care. Like I have godchildren. I have godchildren that are prostitutes. I have godchildren that are sex workers. I have godchildren that are strippers. I have godchildren that are straight, gay, yellow, orange. I have godchildren that don't know what they want to be. I don't care. That doesn't matter. That doesn't mean anything to us about you. Okay? I have godchildren, you know, I have godchildren that are polyamorous, monogamous, this, is. Okay? we don't care about that. All we care about is you. Okay? So if you give us something real, now we got something. Now we can move forward.
Tell the people how they can get a hold of you, Papa. Like what's your email? What's your website? Tell us everything.
Okay. So you can get a hold of me, first of all, by deciding that you want to be real and by deciding that you want progress in your life. Because if you don't want that, you ain't going to get a hold of me. So that's number one. Number two is you can find me at Hector Salva, which you can see my name right here on the screen.com, where you can find all my other websites. We have like 13 or 14 of them things flying around. And you can email us at help@mysticalwork.com. We have a whole bunch of email addresses too, but that's kind of like the easiest one to spell. And help at mysticalwork.com. You can find me on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook at Houngan Hector. And you can find the book, The 21 Divisions, Mysteries and Magic of Dominican Voodoo, everywhere books are sold. And it was published by our friends at Wiser Books, who did a great job helping us out with this project. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. You are so much fun. Your energy is so much fun. It's been a blast. Thank you. I couldn't ask for more. I really couldn't.
Thank you for having me. And thank you to everyone who came here with us and shared with us. Thank you, like all of you guys, for coming, showing support, and doing the work.
Yeah, for sure, you guys. Again, get his book, and I'll see you at the next round, guys. Thank you so much. Have a good night.